All right, are we good to go? Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first quarterly meeting of the Maine Climate Council in 2025. Also, our first meeting since we released the update to Maine's Climate Action Plan, Maine Won't Wait 2.0. I know this is a really busy time for everybody. Many of our council members are spending a lot of time with our friends in the legislature. There have been some exciting developments at the federal level as we transition with the new administration. And so really appreciate people taking the time to join us here this morning. Joyce, you have your hand up. Do you need something? Right. All right. So I know last year, about this time, we spent quite a bit of time talking about response to the terrible storms that we saw last winter. Glad that we're not having that conversation again this year, but now we have a lot to talk about the work that we've been doing to make Maine more resilient to future storms like that we know we can expect to happen again. And so today we've got a pretty light agenda. We're going to give you some updates, hear from several of you. So if we want to go to the agenda, Ashley. Great. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with an update on the ongoing resilience initiatives. Then we'll hear from Dan Burgess at the Governor's Energy Office about the new state energy plan that was released in January. We'll cover some other updates relating to the climate plan and federal funding that supports parts of our plan. And we'll close by reviewing the Climate Council's 2025 meeting schedule and discussing how this group would like to use the remaining meetings this year. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my co-chair, Hannah Pingree.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Loisem, and great to see everyone this morning, at least on Zoom. Again, Molly's actually put in the notes in the chat that you can rename yourself. Everyone got first names this morning, so if it's helpful to name yourself if you can, but no worries if you can't as well. So we're going to kind of dive into resilience, but before I get going, I actually just want to recognize Carl Wilson, who is here, who is, I think, a very familiar face to all of you. He has been the co-chair of the Coastal Marine Working Group, and he is now, I don't want to say what you are formally. I don't know if you've been confirmed yet, but Carl is the, at least the acting, if not the confirmed new commissioner of the Maine Department of Marine Resources. So we're really happy to have Carl. He's now both a co-chair and an official Climate Council member. So welcome, Carl. I won't put you on the spot, but you're welcome to say hello.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm just wondering, do I lose my STS card?
You're going to have to negotiate with Ivan and Susie about that. So best of luck.
Okay, good.
I think they're happy to have you, as long as you haven't forgotten about science, but I don't think you have. So,
right.
And I don't think he's here, but at least at our next Climate Council meeting, we also have a new commissioner just confirmed yesterday of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Really excited to also have him on board. And we just actually broke the news to him yesterday, Sarah and I, about all the task forces and commissions that he's on, including this one, but he was really excited about that. So we'll introduce Mike at our next meeting. So take us maybe 2 more slides forward. I don't need to remind anyone of where we were in January of 2024, but I think just for those of you who weren't there, the governor called the special meeting of the Maine Climate Council. We met at the University of Maine at Augusta, and I think every picture you see on this slide, we heard people from communities talking about these pictures. I think Joyce talked about the incredible damage that Western Maine had seen in December from the December 18th storms. Heather Johnson talked about the economic damage that Western Maine had seen. You see the picture of the spinning mill in Stonington and the floating containers from a major economic development project that was majorly flooded. We had Climate Council member Gary Lamb talking about the downtown flooding in Hallowell, which wasn't unusual, but still caused significant damage. And then we had a number of folks from Stonington, including town manager Kathleen Billings, talking about the devastation of the working waterfront in Stonington. So we at that meeting, I would say we heard from a lot of people. We heard the urgency of the state really focusing on the issues of resilience. And I will just say I am very proud of all of the work that's happened across state government, that's happened in communities, that's happened through a couple of other initiatives that you'll hear about in the next few minutes, about how the state has really responded to the need to better prepare our communities for climate changes, for extreme storm damage. We've heard from both sides of the aisle about the importance of this work. So we're going to talk to you today a little bit about some of the progress that we've made. And I will just say, you'll hear about how we've started other task forces and commissions on these topics. But I will just say the work of the Resilience Working Group, the Coastal and Marine Working Group, this Climate Council really set the basis for so much of the work and the urgency that of what has happened in the recovery over the last year. And again, as Melanie said, we are relieved that Maine has not seen a sort of major storm with the devastating nature that we saw a year ago. But we know that there are still targeted rain events, wind events, and that storms like this will continue to come in the future. So I will just say I'm really proud of how much progress has been made, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the progress we are hoping to advance in the Maine legislature in the next couple weeks, even perhaps. Next slide. So we're going to go through just some specific updates because I think it's helpful for this Climate Council. We're now in kind of a monitoring mode of what's happening, making sure that progress is being made on the goals and the strategies we set out in the November plan for the next 4 years. So we're going to talk about a bill before the Maine legislature, an act to increase storm preparedness for Maine's communities, homes, and infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about the $60 million that the legislature appropriated last year, and a lot of folks and agencies and communities on this call have helped to implement. We're going to hear some exciting updates on the Community Resilience Partnership from Brian and Brett on our team. We're going to hear about the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission that the governor launched last May to really more specifically delve into emergency preparedness and the resilience of our infrastructure. Talk about the state's $69 million NOAA grant, which we are still drawing down and implementing across the state, which is good news. And then Melanie gets the most fun part, talking about permitting and progress, and I think all of the hard work that DEP has continued to do to try to help communities rebuild. So I'm going to just kick it off, and then I will pass it to Brian and Brett. I should have put on here, we also have Samantha Horn from MOCA, who's going to talk about the work to start up the Maine Office of Community Affairs. That is now underway. We're very excited about the progress we are already making, and MOCA really is I would say a central point for a lot of this resilience work. So you'll hear more about that. So next slide, we've probably shown you this before. Joyce has her hand up again. She's sorry. I just think she's so polite. So Joyce is central to all of this. So just to step back a little bit, the governor announced in last May the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission. You'll hear in a little more detail from Brian about the work of that commission. It shared an interim report this past November with some immediate steps that needed to be taken to continue to help Maine to rebuild from the storms, and some actions that could be taken in this legislative session. The governor put forward a bill in early January, LD1, and I will say I'm proud that this bill is LD1, and it came from both the governor's leadership, but also members of the Maine legislature on both sides of the aisle said, what is a bill that we could work on together, where we could all agree that something needs to happen and there is bipartisan support. And the top leaders, Speaker Ryan Fecteau, Senate President Matty Daughtry, Trey Stewart, the Republican leader in the Senate, as well as Billy Bob Fockingham, the Republican leader in the House, all are the co-sponsors of this bill. And I will just say that is a big deal. You can read the newspapers right now to know that bipartisanship can be challenging at times, but I will say both leaders on both sides of the aisle rallied early to support this bill. So the bill does three main things. The first is it launches a new home resilience program at the Maine Bureau of Insurance. Bob Carey, I don't believe he's on this call, but his office has been a part of the Rebuilding Commission and has really come up with some innovative ideas about how to help Maine homeowners better prepare their storms to be their homes to be more resilient in storm events. Whether this is fortified roofs, which states in the South have really led on, or different measures to prevent basement flooding. So $15 million allocated in this bill, not from the general fund, actually from fees collected from insurance sellers across the country. No fee increases proposed. That's what's going to be funding the entirety of LD1. The second portion is additional funding for emergency management at MEMA. One-time $10 million allocation to help us continue to recover from the storms that we are still paying for, but also ensuring that MEMA has funding to prepare for the storms ahead. We heard a lot in the last couple of years in the Climate Council as well as the Resilience Commission about communications. So there's additional funding to help bolster communications in storm events, and also a starting $750,000 allocation to start a storm fund, which is a federal program to provide low interest loans to communities for hazard mitigation and resilience activities. The last portion of the bill is something our team is really excited about. It is the creation of a new state resilience office and Flood Ready Maine initiative at the new Maine Office of Community Affairs. This formalizes some of the work that you will hear about from the big NOAA grant. So officially establishing the State Resilience Office at MOCA and the positions in that office, and then providing significant funding for data work, as well as certified floodplain managers at the regional level. So not sexy, but it is what we have, I know in the Climate Council, have heard about from communities and counties and emergency managers across the state, that they need more information about the storm events we're seeing, where will the infrastructure be vulnerable, and how do they better plan, and how do they better take action, and where is that action most urgently needed. So we are very excited about LD1. I can say to you that I know some of the folks on this call have been sitting with us in the Housing and Economic Development Committee. It received a unanimous report out of that committee just a week or two ago. And again, really appreciating the leadership of folks on both sides of the aisle in supporting this early action. So that's good news. We're happy to answer questions, but making progress, and we expect this to be on the floor of the House and Senate in the next few weeks. Next slide. So the last thing I'll mention, and we've talked about this a little bit, but the last legislature passed a $60 million proposal that came from Governor Mills to help fund urgent rebuilding and recovery efforts after last year's storm events. It took us a little longer to get this passed, but it was passed. It put $10 million into business recovery, $25 million into infrastructure adaptation, and $25 million into working waterfront. At this point, all of the funds are expended except for a little bit of funding at the working waterfront level, where DOT and DMR are continuing to make sure that the complicated waterfront projects that are going over budget are all actually accomplished. And I will say that folks up and down the coast and in inland and businesses have been incredibly appreciative of what these funds have meant for their business recovery, for working waterfront recovery, and for a lot of community projects, including culvert projects and wastewater projects. I think we have learned, and Joyce could probably speak to this, that especially at the community side, this $25 million was really the tip of the iceberg. I know DOT got over $100 million of applications for the $25 million we had to spend. So again, we've, I think, learned a lot across state government about how important these funds are, and the need and the interest on the part of communities and businesses to really step up and think about how to ensure that they're the infrastructure that is really driving our economy is ready for the kinds of storms we're seeing. I don't know, I'm not going to put them on the spot, but if they want to add anything, both Joyce, DOT, DMR have all really led. I don't think there's anybody here from DECD today, but the last $2 million just went out on that program just last week. I'll be quiet for a second in case they want to say anything. All right, next slide. So I'm going to pass this off to Brian and Brett. I think as many people know, and we'll keep reminding you, the first climate plan that we put out in 2020 talked about the importance of investing in communities and community level priorities in both emissions reduction and preparing for resilience. I will just say our team, Carl Wilson. Am I scrambled or is Carl scrambled?
You sound fine to me, Hannah.
Okay, good.
Fine.
Yeah.
All right, I'll blame Carl. You know,
Yeah.
It's the new commissioner. He needs better internet access. The 2020 climate plan recommended the creation of the Community Resilience Partnership Program. Governor Mills launched that at a Climate Council meeting that many of you were at in Orono. We set a goal to get 100 communities participating in that program. And as you will hear, we are now, I would say we are working our way towards 300 communities across the state of Maine, which is a big, big deal. We just set a goal in the most recent climate plan to get 80% of Maine's communities participating by 2030. I think, as many of you know, we have more than 480 cities and towns and tribal governments in Maine. So that is a lot, but this is still a big, big deal. So I will pass it off to Brian to give you a little more detail about the most recent grant round that is coming soon. And then I think Brian will pass it to Samantha Horn and then Melanie Loisem.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And just picking up on that theme, we're definitely hearing from communities that resources through the Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, Community Resilience Partnership are important to the work that they do and help them align their town's projects with all the work that you all have done through the Climate Council. Hannah mentioned the governor's goal of 80% of Maine communities participating in the partnership by 2030. As of this week, we have 263 communities that are participating. So we're at 53% of the way there, which is really fantastic. We also have a small number, but growing, of unorganized territories. All of the tribes are participating. And so as we update these numbers, this goal of 80% of communities and getting there, 53% at this point, is really fantastic and represents the diversity of the types of communities that we have in Maine: large, small, unorganized tribes. All of these communities types of communities are participating. The grant round that is under review at the moment is the largest round that we've had so far. $8 million is available for communities for technical assistance, for energy efficiency projects, for clean energy projects, and of course for resiliency projects. This $8 million includes the state's investments, $3 million a year in the state budget, $5 million from the supplemental resilience funds that were started last year, and then two sources of federal funding. The first is the NOAA grant, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and then a last bit of funding from the Department of Energy, EECBG, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block grants that we started making grants from last year. So we're just wrapping that funding up with this latest round. The partnership received 102 applications for the community action grants in this round. The review team has spent the last 2 months diligently working through those applications, and we're hoping to make those awards in the next couple of weeks here in April. The additional funds from the federal funding and the supplemental budget from last year has allowed the program to increase grant awards up to $75,000 each instead of $50,000, which we had been for the last couple of years, and to offer a new track of grants that specifically give communities technical assistance for conducting vulnerability assessments and trying to understand where they need to prioritize infrastructure or other projects to shore up their resiliency. In the fall, the partnership awarded grants to service provider organizations to help 31 communities do those vulnerability assessments. So really important resiliency work, setting the foundation, building a pipeline of resiliency projects that the partnership or the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund can help support once they're ready to go. The next grant round will open soon after we make these awards in April. So we're gearing up for that. And one of the big projects associated with that is updating the list of actions that are eligible for those community action grants. For the last couple of years, we've had a list that had 72 activities, again, covering energy efficiency, clean energy, and resiliency, that aligned with the first Maine Won't Wait. And now that we have the 2024 update, we're revisiting that list of actions and making sure that those actions incorporate any new activities that Maine Won't Wait is promoting. And we're revisiting some of the old activities to make sure that they make sense and that there's clarity around what those activities are. So exciting times for the partnerships. It's going to be another busy year. And the partnership will be moving over to MOCA in a couple of months to better support communities more holistically, more comprehensively, and help align with some of the other priorities across land use planning and other issues. Ashley, next slide. So the other big process that has been going on for the past 10 months is the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission. And I'll offer thanks to those of you who are doing double duty, serving on both the commission and the council. Thank you very much for your work and your time. For all of you, this first slide probably looks a little familiar because we've showed it to you several times before, but this is the overall work of the commission and the direction. And we produced an interim report last November, which I believe we reported to you on in the December meeting of the council, but I'll go over that just a little bit more here in a second. And then we have a final infrastructure plan due to the governor and the legislature on May 15th of this year. Next slide. So we're on track to meet that May deadline, in part because so much good work was done in the November report. And these are the 12 areas of recommendations that interim report covered. These will look familiar to you again because we showed these to you in December, but just to quickly summarize, we covered topics like communications and coordination in the immediate aftermath of emergencies, identifying and strengthening critical infrastructure like energy, water, and transportation, permitting capacity and reforms, data needs and accessibility, and long-term funding. And if you go to the next slide, Ashley, over the past 2 months, the commission met in smaller groups to dig more deeply into many of those topics. And you'll see the list here to really do the work of understanding what specifically needs to happen in Maine. Where do we need more information? Where do we need investment? And how do we bring this together into a final plan? So last week, the full commission met again, and these small groups reported their work out to the commission. And we're now in the process of combining the small group proposals with the recommendations from November into an actionable plan that the commission will review a draft of at their April meeting, and then issue a plan in May. That plan is really going to contain specific actionable strategies and activities with timeframes, with metrics, with accountability. And so should chart a clear path forward for the state really over the next several decades around how to support and infrastructure and make it more resilient to the storms that we've seen over the past couple of years and the storms that we expect. Next slide. Great, so I will wrap up with the NOAA grant that you all have heard much about over the last 6 months. This is a $69 million grant, and the work falls into 3 large categories. You'll recognize these categories because we drew a lot of them from your work in the first Maine Won't Wait, the second Maine Won't Wait. And so the first and largest by funding puts significant funding into communities through the Community Resilience Partnership, the Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, and some technical assistance through Volunteer Maine. So that's where the largest bulk of the funding from the grant is going. The second bucket here has a number of projects within it that develop technical assistance and resources for communities and explores opportunities for nature-based solutions for resilience through pilots and other regulatory work. And then the third category is investments in the resiliency of our working waterfronts. Carl will now have a big hand in that. And so if you go to the next slide, this is a 5-year grant, and this slide really just scratches the surface of the work that is being done. The grant started in October of last year, so it's been underway for about 6 months. Really, the first couple of months were agencies and partners staffing up to do this work. And now that is mostly complete, many of these projects are just getting underway now. And so you'll see from a couple of milestones have been hit already. Thanks to Ashley and her team, the Community Resilience Partnership has surpassed the goal that we wrote into this grant a year and a half ago to reach 225 communities. We're now at 263. Update this slide later. Really importantly, building some regional capacity to support communities through this work. You'll remember that we had a 2-year pilot project to establish regional coordinators in 4 regional councils across the state. We've now expanded that under this grant to include all 10 of the regional councils for a total of 5 years, and including Maine Service Fellows in 5 host communities across the state. So lots of capacity building going on, and these roles are now all filled, which is really exciting. And as the grant proceeds, there'll be lots of opportunities for communities to engage either through their regional coordinators or directly in parts of this project. The participants and partners of the grant are meeting monthly as a steering committee and quarterly as a broader stakeholder group. And so we get reports on their progress through those meetings and through regular progress reporting. And so I just grabbed a handful of bullets here about upcoming priorities. There's probably 24 more that I could have listed here if we had space. But we're preparing the Community Resilience Partnership grants for the next round. DEP is starting to workshop a design book for living shorelines and coastal bluffs. DACF has launched a new Shore Corps Stewards program under the Maine Conservation Corps. And then the Seafood Economic Accelerator, Maine, has onboarded new co-chairs that will be integral to carrying out this work. So just a little flavor of the work that's happening under this grant. And I think we'll probably have opportunities to bring our updates back to you over the course of the next 4.5 years. So there'll be much more to report on. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions and before handing it off to Samantha.
Kate says exciting. We agree. It is
Thanks,
super
Kate.
exciting. And we are going to get in. We have gotten a lot of questions on our team about, are these funds stable? Are they flowing? And the answer is yes. And we've had helpful back and forth with NOAA, which we can talk a little bit more about. We talked about federal funding, but Brian, just to confirm, this is all being implemented, and that's good news for communities.
All right. Seeing no questions, I'm happy to hand it off to Samantha.
Morning, everyone. Ashley, can we go to the next slide? Great, thanks. And actually, you can just go ahead one more. This is going to be a bit of a repeat for some of you, but maybe others haven't seen this information recently. So I'll go through the basics, but I also want to say that for those of you who were at the Mitchell Center conference yesterday and heard the longer talk, if you have thoughts about how MOCA and the Climate Council work intersect and how we can be the most supportive, I'd welcome you to reach out at any time. So Maine Office of Community Affairs, I started in the director role in October. We've just recently brought on a part-time project manager on a temporary basis. But really what we're looking towards a time in the next few months when we start to staff up and really become an organization that can fulfill our mission. And so here's what the statute says about our mission. So you see language about fostering communications and partnerships between the state and the communities in the state. But I've broken it down into 3 main bullets on the left. Make it easier for communities to find and make use of state planning and resilience resources. So it's that visibility into what's in the state system and how to access it. And then on the back end, aligning our programs so that we're all rowing in the same direction and that we're accomplishing goals for communities that are also in alignment with state goals. And then partnering with organizations in ways that foster success for communities, so that this is all focused on the community experience in moving forward on the work that's important to them in a way that's well supported and also is consistent with state goals to the degree we can incentivize that. Okay, next slide. And so Brian just talked quite a bit, which was super helpful for me. A few updates in there that I hadn't seen yet. So thank you, Brian, for that, about the State Resilience Office. And Hannah, thanks for the update on LD1. So these 2 offices will begin pretty soon, assuming LD1 passes. The State Resilience Office and then Flood Ready Maine in the State Resilience Office can be stood up before the second part of the biennial passes. And we're hoping to have news about the director position for the State Resilience Office fairly soon. We're in hiring for that. We also have announcements out for the other 3 positions in the State Resilience Office. And those are those deadlines end in April, they close in April. So we'll be in the hiring process for that over the course of the spring. So pretty soon we'll actually have the start of our team and be able to really hit the ground running, which is exciting. And then the other programs here are the 7 programs coming from other departments. You've probably seen this list before, and those are proposed in Part D of the biennial budget. And so because of the timing of the budget, it's likely to be probably September, not sure, along those lines when those program moves will happen. And I have to say that the departments where those programs are coming from have been so helpful, and I'm just really grateful to the folks that are supporting this transition. There's a lot of nuts and bolts. It's more complicated than you might think to start a new agency in state government. You keep talking to folks about things like rulemaking and insurance, and most of the time we have to start with, there's a new agency, here's our name. Yes, you need to add us to your drop-down lists in the state system. And so we're doing some of that right now, but pretty soon we'll have, I think, hit all the places that we need to get ourselves added to the system, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. So we are already meeting together as a future MOCA staff, and I think we've had 3 staff meetings, and we're starting to talk about how can we create efficiencies and better service across our programs. What do we need to do to reach out to partners? So we're not waiting for the implementation date to start the work. There are examples like working right now with GoPIF on a funding portal so that communities can more easily find grants. Things like we're working on a list of high priority technical assistance materials that need to be updated so that we can get those out to RFP and get some upgraded technical assistance materials for communities. So things we can do in the interim, we're getting started on, but the formal move date is likely to be in September. Next slide, please. And then, so what are we hoping to get at the end of all this? A one-stop shop model for communities so they can call us and say, hey, we have this issue, and then we can get them to the right place, hopefully the first time, with some commitment that on the other end of the phone there's someone who can help them. Aligning incentives and policies so that as we're providing grant funding and technical assistance, we're, as much as possible, moving communities towards policies and implementation that's going to be resilient in the long run and is consistent with all the good work that's gone into Maine Won't Wait and into the Resilience Commission. So we're using the Maine Won't Wait and the Resilience Commission report and a number of other policy efforts that have already been completed as our sort of endpoint desired benchmark. So we're trying to align existing programs to funnel work towards those endpoints. And then also reducing the administrative burden on communities and service providers. So there's a lot of opportunity to take small disparate programs either combine them or put a common face on them so that it's easier to interact with them. One good example is there are ways to potentially have a common application for grant programs. There's also opportunities to work with the regional councils. I know they would really like to have some of the funding streams from state government, if not potentially combined, but if not, maybe deadlines and reporting requirements aligned a little better so that it's not like having, half a dozen very separate grants that they're interacting with the state on, but there's some coordination and it reduces paperwork burden for them. And I think we also can focus on where, we've provided very specific grants and there's some pieces missing that tie all those grants together in terms of planning work. So I think there's some real opportunities there. There's some other examples here that I won't read to you, but we've really been thinking about how can we create a lot of impact on a short timeline towards the goals that are laid out in Maine Won't Wait and will be laid out in the Resilience Commission work. So that's the overview. I'm happy to answer any questions about where we are in the process. Obviously, there's a million details running around in my head right now, but I promise I won't tell you all about them.
Great. Any questions? I will say Samantha has been doing a fantastic job, and she talked about the details of state government, which many commissioners and state staff know, and she's doing a really good job navigating them. So we, again, for those of you who can help advocate, we're continuing to advocate to legislators to help us complete the movement of MOCA and the creation of MOCA through the state budget. It has been created, but the programs will be moved in the second part of the budget. So we feel good bipartisan support, but we're just continuing to ensure that it all does actually happen in the next couple months. Great. Hopefully maybe Samantha can put her contact in the chat for those of you who haven't met her. Please reach out. And Amy Landry appreciates your work. I'm sure the mentions of the regional commissions are helpful. All right, I think it's Melanie.
All right, Ashley, you want to go to my slides? Great, thank you. So as I think you all know, in addition to being co-chair of the Maine Climate Council, I'm also commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. As you heard a little bit, as Brian was talking about, recommendations from the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, permitting and regulatory requirements at DEP are often identified as an integral part of helping us to rebuild and to build to be more resilient. And so DEP certainly is very sensitive to the role that we play and trying to make sure that we are reviewing our processes to support the needs of the state, not only for resilience, but also just for our economy as well. And, it's a fine balance that we have to find between, meeting those objectives and demands for protecting our infrastructure, for protecting properties, but also meeting our statutory obligations to also protect Maine's natural resources, which are also a critical part of our economy. And looking at things like ways that we can use nature-based solutions instead of hard armoring so that we're developing systems, ecological systems and natural systems that will be more resilient in the long run than some of the traditional hard armoring methods that we've seen in the past. So next slide. So first, I'm really excited to announce that we have recently launched our new Maine Environmental Licensing System, referred to as MELS. And so that link there on the slide, mels.maine.gov, will get you to our new online portal. It has great capability moving forward into the future. I'll warn you that it's still new. And so, of course, there's all kinds of hiccups. And we don't have all of our data loaded into it yet, but this is where people can apply for a permit online. So our Land Bureau, our land licensing programs have gone first into the system. So Natural Resources Protection Act applications, stormwater, site law, Permit by rule notices, all of that can be accomplished online at 3 a.m. You can do business with the department through this system. Because we know that many business owners and property owners all have day jobs. And so dealing with DEP permitting sometimes is another additional burden that they have to deal with to meet their needs. So the system also has a public-facing side for citizens who are interested in seeing what's going on in their community, what kind of applications are under review. You can submit comments on permit applications while they're under review through that system. All the documents associated with our permitting decisions will all be there. So we're really hoping that this is going to move us forward into the future, make permitting easier with the department, make all of our permitting work much more transparent to the regulated community and to interested members of the public. So next slide. So in addition to that, we've certainly been hearing the demands from Maine citizens and from developers to make permitting easier. One of the things that we've been grappling with is a huge increase in the number of applications that we've received, particularly following last winter's storms. So first we had the tidal wave of solar development applications a couple of years ago. And just as we were trying to dig our way out of that backlog, then everybody had their piers, docks, wharves, and homes, properties, and businesses destroyed along our tidal rivers and our coastline last year. And we know that people need to get those structures rebuilt, replaced, made stronger before the next storm comes. And so we need to move fast and help people do that. We have started working with third-party vendors to outsource permit application reviews. We've got a list of pre-qualified vendors, largely environmental consultants. They're the same folks that help people fill out and submit their permit applications, are also helping us with reviewing other permit applications. For new major projects coming online, we're talking to applicants about going directly to a third-party vendor to do that application review. They can pay a special fee and then have a time frame for review that's guaranteed by that consultant. Now, that doesn't mean that those consultants are making permitting decisions. They're going to be reviewing the documentation to make sure that the application meets all the applicable standards, just like our staff do. And then they'll be providing that recommendation to department managers to make the final decision and to review the orders, because they will still need to be legally defensible and ensure that they meet all of our standards. Glass offices, people see you and think that they can come in. So sorry. Somebody might just do that. So we're also working on making changes to increase the number of types of permits by rule that could be available to applicants. So a permit by rule is one where there's standards that are established in the rule. And then as long as somebody's project is going to meet those standards, they submit a notice, give us some of those details. It's a quick turnaround on those to get approval, and then people can move forward. So in a minute, I'll talk about some of the rule chapters we're looking at revising to make those changes. We're also looking at all of our rules for natural resource protection to try to establish clearer standards. So we use a lot of subjective terms. It's difficult for an applicant to know what they need to do to be able to meet those standards. And so we're working on revising several of our rules to make sure that those standards are clear and understandable. So when someone is trying to design a project, they know how to design it to meet those standards and don't get caught up in a lengthy iterative process with us to get to yes. And then lastly, we're looking at using the best available science and publicly accessible tools. So for instance, the picture on the left is the sand dune map that's available from the Maine Geologic Survey. They've mapped the entire coastline and identified where sand dunes are located. We just updated our sand dune rules last year to incorporate a reference to these maps. So people who have properties in sand dune systems can look at which kind of dune they're in and compare that to the rules to figure out what they will be able to do with their property. And then on the right is a picture of a document from the Army Corps of Engineers. We've been really excited to see the work coming out of the Army Corps in the last few years focused on nature-based solutions. And with this program that they have, Engineering with Nature. So again, looking at ways to use, rather than hard armoring, build more green infrastructure that can absorb some of the impacts that we see from coastal storms rather than reflecting that energy back out into the ocean. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we are making some changes to a couple specific rules. Our Chapter 305 rule is the permit by rule chapter for the Natural Resources Protection Act. And then Chapter 310 contains the requirements for a full permit. Last year, there was legislation that provided some permitting exemptions. And we're working on integrating that into that rule chapter now. That includes allowing the use of biodegradable materials for sand dune restoration to be done by permit by rule, as well as beach scraping, and then also increasing seawall heights up to the base flood elevation, except in a sand dune system. And then under the full permit requirements of Chapter 310, again, trying to provide very clear standards for people to determine what kind of projects would be approvable, looking at setting some limits on the use of riprap and hard armoring if a property doesn't have any infrastructure, home, road, something like that, that actually requires protection. And, some of that guidance we're getting from the great work that's been done by the Science and Technical Subcommittee of the Climate Council, and looking at the effects of closing off sand systems and sediment systems along our sand dunes and our coastal bluffs. Hard armoring can cut off that cycle, which is actually a natural cycle that's necessary for protecting habitat and providing for long-term resilience of those systems. So we're trying to integrate the demands for property protection, the needs of people and infrastructure to be able to use those properties, particularly our working waterfronts, but also balancing that with the latest science that we've got suggesting the best ways to make sure we've got long-term resilient systems. So sorry about that. The folks outside my office were quite determined, so I had to determinedly ignore them. So hope I didn't screw any of that up, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Melanie, I'm very impressed with your ability to manage with people waving at you. I don't think you screwed anything up. And this is a tongue-in-cheek question, but the system name Mel's, it sounds very much like your nickname. So I love it. Won't say, you don't have to answer anymore.
Well, I'll tell you that apparently the vendor who builds the system for other states, it is typical that it is the initials for the state followed by ELS. So our choices were Mel's or Meals. And so I decided that I could suck it up and we could go with Mel's.
Love it. No one is waving wildly or jumping in. I will just say, though, that it is, Glenn's got his hand up. You can ask a hard question.
No, I think an easy one. Commissioner, could you give a couple examples of how you're using nature more than traditional riprap and hard armoring? Like, how exactly does that work?
Sure. Well, so for instance, with the sand dune restoration projects, there are coconut core filled logs that can be driven into the sand. It does require using metal stakes in many cases, particularly if it's a high velocity environment. But we are hearing that those kind of projects can be really successful. And so then you see, as you have sort of that tidal action, it like sand dune grasses would, it effectively catches the sand and holds it. Whereas if you had built just a rock or a cement wall, it would have just reflected that back out. Another example would be the use of the Christmas trees on the beaches. That's one of my favorites, and it does seem like that's working really well over time. Also encouraging some property owners who have had to rebuild seawalls to also think about using things like the coconut core and more vegetation behind the walls, and advising them that, having a nice lawn out to your seawall and then to the beach might seem like a great idea, but the next time the storm comes, wouldn't you rather have some bushes there to help catch all that debris and that sand? So looking at things like that, and then Similarly along the coastal bluffs, there are things like vegetative mattresses, using things like natural debris and logs, and trying to find ways to integrate that into those bluff systems. And so I think Brian mentioned we're working on our shore workbook that would consider lots of different kinds of coastal environments and tidal environments, and working with a lot of stakeholders to build out those kind of practical examples to serve as templates for future projects.
Kate.
I said to the panelists, this is all music to my ears. So thank you, Commissioner and team. I wanted others who weren't on the chat to hear that. Yeah, and those are super great examples. And you mentioned the Christmas trees. Popham Beach is near to my home, near and dear to my heart, and near to my home. And, one of the great, this is so true of all of our work together is, these what seem like demonstration projects really build community awareness. And so, shout out to BPL, because I know that at Popham and Reed, it's been wildly successful in getting people to get their trees there. And, the Popham one 2 years ago, of course, hit right when people were delivering their trees. But, I just think when we can take kind of relatively minor action that really has a public impact and lots of publicity, it just goes so far to inform all of us the way we can approach things differently. I know at many of our council meetings in our most recent report, there's been a lot of talk about education, and these are education plus demonstration is a really phenomenal way to have us all understand that we can collectively take action. So shout out to DEP and BPL and others for showing what's possible with nature.
Kate, excellent, very well said. And I would just say, Melanie co-chairs this council, but we all come up with a lot of recommendations, and then in many cases the state agencies have to do the hard work, and I think the DEP has had to do some of the hardest work. So just to Melanie and Rob and everyone who's made these things happen, just it is really important, and it is not easy. A lot of comments, and they've really done I think a really good job of figuring out the right pathway, and it will, I'm sure, continue to evolve. But just thanks everyone who weighed in. I am going to just shift because I know that Molly and Bryant has to leave, and I want her to weigh in before she does. So I'm just going to shift to, we just wanted to give you a couple more Climate Council updates before we talk about this state energy plan. So again, thank you, Melanie, Samantha, and Brian for, I would say, just a lot of exciting work being advanced in real ways on resilience. I want to also just recognize Molly, who is here. Molly Siegel, it's her, I think, hopefully for her last Climate Council meeting that she's managing. She has a new job in our office managing buildings policy, but she's continuing to pinch hit, and we're in the process of hiring a new Maine Climate Council coordinator. And I will just say a lot of folks are interested in this job, so it speaks to the importance of this work, and maybe sadly also to the number of great climate folks looking for jobs. So we hope to send you news on that soon. I want to say we're finalizing an economic benefits analysis and air quality analysis of Maine Won't Wait that we've been working on with our consultants, Evolved Energy Research. This is a required deliverable as part of our EPA grant that funded the climate plan update. It will help us understand the impacts of the plan on both jobs and employment, as well as air quality and health outcomes. So we will share it with you in a newsletter and in other ways. All of our consultant work products will also be posted on our website with other technical reports. I want to just turn it over to Molly, who has led our equity subcommittee with a number of other excellent leaders over the years. We've been really thinking in this current environment, as well as we implement a lot of the goals that the Climate Council set out in the November plan about how to continue to best do this work, as well as to really engage in a more ongoing way with our community partners. So before Molly has to leave, I just wanted to pass it off to her for a quick update.
Thanks, Hannah. And yes, I apologize for jumping at 10. I think my life is a glass office, Commissioner, so I can relate. So yes, the work of the Equity Subcommittee marches on. We are a leadership team of 5 now, really great group, lots of great ideas. On March 5th, there was a meeting with representatives from about 20 organizations interested in working on climate communication and outreach, including members of our Equity Subcommittee. Through this meeting and other work, we have heard a clear call for the Maine Climate Council to continue working with community-based organizations to understand the unique needs and challenges of people in diverse communities throughout Maine. We've also heard a need for continued information sharing to make sure that people have the information they need to make informed decisions in the face of climate challenges and opportunities. A lot of that's been shared this morning as well, really in line with what we're finding. And finally, we've heard about many ways that partner organizations are already supporting communities through the Community Resilience Partnership and other programs, and how continued support for these programs is vital to building and sustaining resilience in Maine communities. And as the Equity Subcommittee this year, we plan to explore ways that the Climate Council and working groups can support these priorities in order to ensure diverse benefits of this climate plan across Maine. So it's been some really enriching work. I think we've spent a lot of time coming up with lots of research and perspectives from the different groups that we're organizing. And now we're ready to really dig in with these different organizations and find out on the ground what the needs are and how we can help be an access point from the Climate Council work into the broader communities.
Great. Thank you, Molly, for that. And thank you. I think I saw Noelle out there, Amara, Dr. Ba, and we have also just added Jason Parent from Aroostook County CAP, who's been really involved to that group of leaders. So again, really appreciate your leadership. And actually, before Molly leaves, I just want to give a quick update that on the state's work to partner more directly in a sort of government to government tribal consultation on Maine Climate Council issues. I will just say that Molly was a real leader in helping us think about how to do this well. And Melanie and I, Molly was there, had the first quarterly meeting with Maine chiefs and Maine tribal leadership, talking about the Climate Council's work, the work of Maine's tribal governments, and areas of collaboration. And I will just say it was a very positive call. We've had a number of sort of sub calls about specific energy projects and work that's happening in Maine's tribal communities. And I would just say, I think it was a really good kickoff. So we'll continue that. We'll continue to update the Climate Council on that work with, I think, Molly and Melanie's help. But I just would say, I think it's a good evolution of the way in which we work with tribal nations in Maine. So thank you, Molly. And I don't know if you or Melanie want to add anything else. But again, I think it's been a good start.
I would agree wholeheartedly. Thank you, Hannah.
Great. I think with that, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we're going to pass it to Dan Burgess, who is going to give us an update on lots of exciting work coming out of the Governor's Energy Office and the new state energy plan.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a brief update of the state's energy plan, as well as a recently released clean energy industry report. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the energy plan is required by statute for the GEO to develop and update every 2 years. This Maine energy plan, the picture on the top left, was published this last January after 18 months of stakeholder engagement and technical modeling, and really looks at objectives and strategies to ensure affordable, reliable, and increasingly cleaner energy for Maine by 2040. In addition to the statutory requirements, the governor directed the Energy Office to develop a pathway to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. We are currently at 80% by 2030 with a goal of 100% by 2050. And so this really looked at what the future energy systems could look like to achieve 100% by 2040. Again, technical analysis was done by Brattle, the Brattle Group, and Evolved Energy Research to inform the energy plan and underpin the modeling. And I'll cover some of the key takeaways in a second. And I would just note, particularly for the Climate Council, is the plan is closely aligned with the work of the Climate Council, as well as other statewide planning efforts, the Resilience Commission, the state's economic development plan, and otherwise. And of particular importance is the pathway to 2040 modeling, which underpins, again, the energy plan, included the recommendations and the assumptions of the modeling of the Climate Council, particularly on the demand side of the energy sector, so buildings and transportation. So looking at the electric sector demand growth and as well as other sectors of what the system will look like in 2040. Next slide. So if you look at the technical analysis, which I'm calling the pathways, we'll refer to as the pathways report, really the first of its kind technical analysis of Maine's energy system, modeled every hour of every day between now and 2050, incorporating weather forecasts, technology cost models, to make informed projections about Maine's needs and how to meet those needs in the most cost-effective and different scenarios. Technical report looked at a core pathway, which was a high renewable, high electrification scenario, consistent with other state policies, and then 5 different other pathways, each of which incorporated different components. So we turned the dials on a few different pathways for different demand and supply scenarios and how that would be managed. All of them achieving GHG and reduction requirements and other statutory objectives. The energy plan and this modeling doesn't prescribe one static pathway to meet our goals, but these examples have really helped to inform, the energy plan and the pathway to 2040. So one of the key takeaways I think is really important to underline is that 100% clean energy by 2040 is achievable, beneficial, and results in reduced energy costs across the economy, and on underlying energy costs. What you're seeing in this left-hand chart is that overall energy use will decline, but we will be using more electricity. And so our electric load will double by 2050. And so you're seeing, again, the overall energy demand, so that's overall fuels and other consumption decrease, but we're using more electricity, which is more efficient. I think that's very much in line with a lot of the Climate Council's findings. Other considerations which we'll talk about are it's really important to think about innovation, emerging technologies, and applications for load flexibility. So looking at how that overall or electric load is managed can really help ensure cost effectiveness of this pathway, but also reduce unnecessary build out of some of the electricity systems. Next slide. So we took this modeling and then and all of the other work and the stakeholder feedback that we received and really outlined 5 different energy plan objectives. The first is delivering affordable energy for Maine people and businesses. The next is ensuring that energy systems are reliable and resilient in the face of growing challenges. C is to responsibly advance clean energy. D is to deploy efficient technologies to reduce energy costs, really thinking about beneficial electrification and energy efficiency opportunities. And then E, expanding the clean energy career opportunities and advancing innovation. So I'll go through each of these briefly and happy to take questions as we go. Next slide, please. So the first objective, again, focused on affordable energy for Maine people and businesses, really kind of underpins much of the report. And each objective has different strategies and then key actions within them. And so really objective A is again, focused on affordability. First among that, Maine has had a statutory objective to reduce Maine's dependence on imported fossil fuels since at least 2011. And what you can see on this chart on the right is we continue to be an outlier in our reliance on home heating oil. We are the most home heating oil reliant state in the country. Those are small letters, but we are the blue bar all the way to the right. At about 50% of our homes relying on home heating oil. The other green states are the other New England states, and then the national average is just 4%. So as this Climate Council knows, that continues to be an opportunity for increasing energy affordability, and has been a goal of the state for some time. I think the good news is that we've made real progress in that area thanks to a lot of the work of the Climate Council and other partners. We want to continue to focus on reducing energy burden, strategy B, and then looking at existing opportunities and approaches for electricity cost control. Next slide. Objective B is really focused on resiliency, and much in line with the Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, which we've heard about. We want to establish data-driven targets for resilience, increase coordination, deploy targeted resources, looking at opportunities for innovation such as microgrids or solar plus storage or other planning opportunities. Want to strengthen planning engagement by our utilities, which is happening now through legislation that the governor signed into law for climate change protection plans and grid planning. And then we want to advance partnerships and coordination and coordinate with relevant federal and others to bring funding here to help this work. Next slide. Objective C is to responsibly advance clean energy. I won't spend a great deal of time here, but this chart shows overall electric demand. We talked about electricity load doubling by 2050. That's the solid black line. The dotted line, black line, is our current 80% clean energy by 2030. And then the red line is what we would need to move towards to get to that 100% clean electricity by 2040. The bars within it are planned clean energy procurements or contracted resources. So I think it's interesting to show that we have much of the clean energy resources either planned or have statutory requirements or ability to meet them. But clearly we need to build new infrastructure in order to make that happen. But the analysis shows that getting to the 90% renewable is very much achievable. That in order to get to 100%, we'll need to also establish a new clean energy standard. We could spend a lot of time really kind of on this point, but there are some larger scale zero emission resources which we don't count as renewable. But they'll be important to count for that last 10% in order to meet the 100% target. We need to continue to establish regular schedule of competitive energy purchases to make sure that these bars below add up to the demand that we need. A big part of that will be offshore wind, but also the need to, we're going to need to build new infrastructure such as transmission in order to connect many of those resources. And then really importantly, we share a regional grid with the other New England states and have a close relationship also with the Canadian provinces. And we need to make sure that we're collaborating to maximize benefits and achieve our shared objectives. Next slide. D is really about, as I mentioned, deploying beneficial electrification, but also energy efficiency. And I think I'm short on time, so I won't go into this in great detail, but continuing the work that's happening and is laid out by the Climate Council is really critical to reducing and ensuring energy affordability and also meeting our GHG targets. Next slide. The final objective in the energy plan is around the clean energy sector workforce and innovation opportunities. We'll talk about the new report that we've released on clean energy sector jobs, but we want to continue to raise awareness of energy careers and connect employers through the Clean Energy Partnership out of the Energy Office and through the Clean Energy Jobs Network, which is live now. We want to coordinate on advancing curricula, technical training, experiential learning, coordinate with the educational institutions and others that are training folks and connecting them to employers. And then we want to continue to expand programs for technical assistance, but also innovation work like that's happening at the Rue Institute, the University of Maine, Dirigo Labs, and then business growth funding, which CEI is working on right now to grow the energy efficiency sector. Next slide. So those are the 5 objectives within the energy plan. It's I will make sure that the document is put in the chat so that you have it. And then also there's an appendix of, 100+ pages of technical analysis around energy modeling. We are working with the legislature on a number of different related pieces of legislation related to this. One is, we've talked about before, creating a Department of Energy Resources, elevating the GEO, which we're excited about. And the others are particularly going to be around the clean energy standard and regular cadence of procurements. Finally, probably over time, want to flag that we released the 2024 Clean Energy Industry Report a few weeks ago. And the highlight here is that the Maine clean energy sector has surpassed over 15,500 jobs, and that the sector contributes close to $3 billion to Maine's economy every year. So this is a really significant sector for Maine's, obviously the energy work, affordability work, and related to the Climate Council, but it's also a really big growth sector. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the clean energy career growth year over year. You can see the dip from the pandemic, 2019 to 2020, but we've really, we're one of the first states to surpass where we were in the pandemic, and we are continuing to see that year over year growth. So 4% growth from 2022 to 2023, outpacing I think a few of the other states and other portions of the economy. So we're going to continue to do this work. I think no surprise to folks here that the largest sector of this of the clean energy economy is the energy efficiency economy. So tying directly back to that objective of energy efficiency and beneficial electrification, important work that's happening across this group, Efficiency, Maine Trust, and others. And so we're going to do some continued focus on different career pathways and looking at some specific, what actions do we need to take to continue to ensure this growth. So I'll make sure this is also shared in the chat if folks don't have it, but those were the highlights of the energy plan and the clean energy industry report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any hard questions for Dan? Only hard questions. No, just, or softballs. Gary has one. Gary's going to ask you a hard question.
Great.
Jump in, Gary.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Canadian Hydro, is it part of that mix in what you just showed, Dan?
Sure. So the current renewable portfolio standard in Maine has is capped up to 100 megawatts, much in line with the other New England states. Massachusetts is capped at 30, and others have a variety of caps of what qualifies. Canadian Hydro and just resources from Canada, whether it's through northern Maine or otherwise, are a critical part of New England's electricity mix and into Maine. The clean energy standard discussion, I think, is talking about for that last 10%, how do we having a portfolio standard or a place for those clean energy attributes, like for large scale Canadian Hydro, that can help us meet that last 10%.
So more simplified, is Canadian Hydro part of the definition, under the definition of clean energy?
The statutory definition for the renewable portfolio standard does not include hydro over 100 megawatts. If there was a 100 megawatt resource from Canada below, and it was connected in the New England control area and had a NEPOOL GIS certificate, it would. And they chose to retire, RECs here. I think some of the discussion is around, so that's renewable. The kind of clean energy standard that we're talking about, it's that needs to be defined by the legislature of what would qualify, and we're talking about with the legislature about that now. But I think that would be a place where large scale Canadian Hydro might qualify.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Glenn.
And I was just kind of curious about whether these potential retaliatory tariffs from Canada around clean energy would set back some of your analysis at all in terms of uh, pushing people away from electricity, at least temporarily during that time of the tariffs. Is that considered your analysis, or is that hoping for the best?
Thanks, Glenn. We, as I mentioned, this report was published in January with 18 months of prior work and modeling and analysis, and included the knowledge that we had at the moment, particularly around technology costs and technology implementation. So things like federal tax credits that exist and are currently exist in law were included, or technology cost declines. We're certainly monitoring closely whether it's Canadian tariffs or the potential for other tariffs to impact the supply chain of new technologies across the board. So we're certainly monitoring that. And clearly our relationship with the provinces to the north is really interwoven, and that's particularly true for energy. And so we're monitoring that closely. And I think what I can say also is that the technology cost declines that we've seen for a lot of these resources and a lot of the planned resources that we have, continue to be on the downward trajectory, over the last 2 decades, whether it's solar, wind, batteries, offshore wind, even kind of new CHP, biomass, hydro resources. I think those continue to go in the right direction, and we'll, monitor the federal work closely.
Ivan.
Thanks, Dan. So that was for a modeling for a doubling of electricity demand by 2050, correct?
Roughly, yes.
Roughly. And so in those exercises, and I was trying to page down very quickly to see if I could find it myself, but was there an envelope of probability? Obviously, that's some sort of projected mean scenario, and there's an envelope of potential likely ranges, which is very hard to predict, I realize. But was there an analysis of that to some extent in the interpretation of the outcome?
Thanks, Ivan. If I want to make sure I get this right, I mean, I think what we wanted to do was look at the much of the projections of what's needed to meet our GHG reductions, particularly laid out by the Climate Council, and then figure out what the energy system would look like over that time. And so there was not deviation necessarily from what the Climate Council had laid forward for what the emissions scenarios would look like. And so we did use that pathway and those results to kind of drive the energy system. I think what we did find throughout this, and I think the Energy Working Group spent a lot of time on this, is the real importance of things like load flexibility to, making sure that we're managing that system. And if we're doubling it and not, that could be the difference between, 2.5 or 3x as opposed to doubling.
Yeah.
I think, we have a energy plan that we'll work on to get ready for publication by the end of next year, by the end of 26. And I think we'll look at kind of where we're at from meeting those targets, the latest that we see from demand from ICE in New England and the trajectory of that. I think, sorry, I'm going on, but I will just say the direction, I think, will continue. Are we right on this year or over the next year? I think some of that will be kind of year to year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm going to give Kate the last question.
Hannah, I don't have to speak if we're running over. Okay. Dan, this is super helpful. And Hannah, I think you had asked in the beginning, future conversations. And maybe the rest of my team is already in this conversation with Dan's team. For me, and maybe for others of us who work across the ISO in New England, it would be really helpful to get some insights into what you and the governor have been doing to work together within the ISO, but also, think about this at the scale that, as you said, is deployed. And so, obviously we can take some really great action here in Maine, and we're essential, and what another state does impacts us. So over time, at least for me, it would be really helpful to be able to think at that scale and what Maine's part of it is. So that doesn't have to be a whole climate council if it's not appropriate, but I know for many of us who work in organizations that are multi-state, that might be.
Yeah, that sounds great, Kate. Happy to do that with this group, or optional or otherwise. I mean, I think what I can say is the governors in 2019 or 2020 put out a statement and a vision for and really kind of how, the work we wanted to see regionally, and particularly with ISO New England, seeking more transparency, longer term planning, and real focused on state objectives. And what we've seen is that planning happening, and in a way that hasn't happened before, and real engagement with the states, which is, I think, an example of that. There's been a long-term transmission planning effort done, and a recognition that states will need to share in some of the objectives, but also the costs of those projects. And there's it's called the LTTP, long-term transmission planning. There's a draft RFP and a new RFP coming for to unlock some of the constraints and congestion issues flowing from Maine south. So one of the first major projects that's coming out of the LTT process is a Maine focused effort to be able to export more electricity and be more connected to the region without congestion. And so I think that's a really good example of how the states are working closely together, but also with ISO New England. And but happy to especially get Chairman Bartlett and I to talk to whomever is interested about that work.
I think Kate is volunteering. She wants to jump in, and I would say Noelle also put in the chat. Sort of our brief last conversation after we talk about federal funding is sort of future topics of the Maine Climate Council and things that people want to dig into this year. Also, the working groups do spend time digging in and getting into implementation topics. So this is obviously a pretty energy focused one. So I know that Ken and Dan are game to really share what's happening and what else Climate Council members as well as working group members sort of how they're feeling it on the ground, but also how we think about implementation and some of the challenges we're facing. And I will just say, speaking of challenges, we want to talk about sort of the status of some of the federal funds. It's a question we get a lot. And I think at this point, I would say that we don't necessarily have clear answers. And I'm going to just ask some of the folks in the Climate Council who are helping to manage some of Maine's major federal climate grants weigh in. But I will just say we are in an environment, Glenn brought up tariffs. And obviously, I can't tell you any more than any of you all know from reading the newspaper about what's about to happen with additional tariffs. We saw just additional announcements about tariffs with vehicles. We know that tariffs could impact energy costs for the state of Maine. So we are living in an environment that is less predictable. And a lot of our Climate Council work and modeling was built on the Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, the implementation of those programs. Those laws remain in effect, and the state of Maine continues to work with the Attorney General's office and others to ensure that we can implement those laws, those tax credits, those funding programs that Maine was awarded. But again, I don't need to tell any of you that it is an uncertain time. And I think state agencies are doing a really good job trying to navigate that uncertainty and try to give clarity to communities about grants that we have awarded, make sure that we're managing risk, but also make sure that we're continuing to make progress. And I think what you'll hear from a couple folks across state agencies is we are still accessing federal funds. We are still implementing federal funding programs. And many of the laws passed over the last 4 to 6 years remain in effect. So that is good news. So by the way, we're skipping a break and we're just going to try to finish this meeting on time or early. But I just would, just sort of in that spirit, Maine DOT, Efficiency Maine, Maine Housing, the Governor's Energy Office, CDC, the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, DMR. I think a lot of us are managing uncertainty in federal funding programs, MEMA. I would just invite sort of any state agency leadership out there who's sort of willing to provide an update. I know a lot of Climate Council members have asked these questions. And again, we're reading the newspaper. Many commissioners and the Attorney General's office is negotiating on behalf of the state of Maine. And again, we have made some good progress. So I'm looking out and I'm seeing Joyce, Michael, Dan. I don't know if any of you want to jump in and be first up. Joyce, now you have your hand raised appropriately.
I know, I'm sorry. So, I mean, I think the state of Maine, we, with Efficiency Maine, did a lot of things early. We were, one of the first states out of the gate, which is coming in handy right now because we've obligated 4 of the 5 years of the NEVI funds, and we have project agreements where we need to have them. So, we expect more guidance, but here and now we're feeling somewhat assured that we can keep moving forward. And so we are just going to proceed as if we can and see what happens. They are reimbursing us for the few bills that we've put in on some things. So I think we will just continue on this path right now and see what happens. I mean, I will say, for those of us in this, one day you might get a memo and the next day things change. It seems like it's calming down a little bit from that first month. So, but it was a little crazy there for that first month, and we're not getting a lot of even verbal guidance from Federal Highway, but they at least have never stopped talking to us, where I know some other agencies have had issues with their federal partners. So that is, I don't know, Michael, if you want to add anything else.
I might just jump in and ask Ashley to take down the slides. I'm also seeing Joyce spotlighted, which is excellent, but
I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
I'm not blaming you, Joyce. It's great to see you.
Oh, I'm having computer issues. Okay. There.
Michael, Dan, go for it.
So in addition to the EV charger funds that Joyce just mentioned, we have, I'll let Dan talk about the IRA rebate grants, but in addition to those, we have some sort of obscure funds. One is a $10 million grant to do heat pump replacements in low-income mobile homes. And that recently was given the green light to go ahead and proceed. We have been holding off, waiting to confirm that they were going to release those funds, but they're telling us now that they will. That's a companion piece to a portion of what we were planning to spend the IRA rebate funds on, which have received some of its funding already. So we've been able to start the low-income mobile home retrofits with the IRA, with that portion of the IRA rebate money. So that's been up and running so far. There's a small grant that we have received and also got the green light for financing of HVAC system retrofits in assisted living facilities. We haven't done any projects yet, but that just got launched. And then the last one that's entirely in our court is funding for the Efficiency Maine Green Bank. And we have $25 million that was awarded to us and transferred into our account at Citibank, but was then frozen under assertions by the FBI that something not legal was going on here. Because that's what you need to do if you want to freeze money at a bank that is in somebody else's name. Otherwise, you can't do that. So with the help of the Maine AG's office, we've joined 3 other states in filing complaints and asking them to undo that freeze so that we can proceed with offering loans for starting with homeowners, and then our intention is to expand to small businesses and bigger businesses that are replacing their HVAC systems with heat pumps and or weatherizing their homes. So we'll see where that lands. Right now, we do have money in that loan program, so we have enough to keep busy for the next year or so, but we won't be able to go much beyond that if we don't get this Green Bank money unfrozen from Citibank.
Yeah, and in addition to Michael's on the energy side, so we have about 220 million awarded to the energy office, and then another 600 to 700 million, probably more than 700 million in energy funds that are going to other entities in Maine for both kind of larger scale and small scale projects. So we're as Hannah mentioned, kind of monitoring and moving forward with a lot of those. The ones I'll highlight are coming to the energy office, a $65 million GRIP grant through the Grid Deployment Office for flexible interconnection, working with our utilities. That's conditionally awarded. We're working through that. We have a $62 million Solar for All award, which you may have seen some in the media about, had been off, but is now currently back on for and available to us. That is in the planning phase. We have a couple of staff on board that are helping plan that, and we are working diligently to move that into the programming phase so that those funds can be administered for Maine. There's about $72 million in home energy rebates funding, which Michael mentioned. Half of that is for the appliance rebates. When that program was launched and is available and active for mobile and manufactured home retrofits for high efficiency heat pumps, and then multifamily affordable housing, which again, those programs are open. You've seen some states turn them on or off, but we've been able to maintain that. The other half is conditionally awarded, and that's focused on weatherization, and we are still working through that. There's the Maine housing. Dan gave us an update before. There's $31 million that was in a similar position, or 31 for WAP funding through the BIL or the infrastructure law, that had not been available, but is now currently available for drawdown, which is good news. So that program will be continuing as anticipated. There's a lot of other kind of quote smaller from energy code training, contractor training, and other funds that the energy office is focused on. A couple others that aren't direct Maine, directly to the energy office, but are benefiting Maine, would be a regional grant that Massachusetts is the lead on, which includes $150 million for the Lincoln Battery Energy Storage Project, and then a regional CPRG Climate Pollution Reduction Grant that Connecticut is leading, focused on heat pumps, that we are all working closely on. There's an RFP out right now from Connecticut for an administrator of those funds that closes April 10th. Yeah, that's probably enough for me, but a lot of balls in the air on those that we're working hard to make sure come to Maine.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And I would just say, again, I think it speaks to we're not implementing easily or simply in these times, but a lot of people think all these grants have been canceled, and that is not the case. And these programs, from weatherization to heat pump installation, are happening. I know Amanda Beal was driving. I think I just lost her. She went away from my screen. Elaine has her hand up, so jump in, Elaine. But if Amanda, Ann Fuchs, any other state agency leadership want to kind of weigh in on, there's a lot of moving parts.
I am here, Hannah. It's Amanda, but I can.
Great. You want to jump in, Amanda, and then I'll go to Elaine?
Yeah. And sorry, I have to be in transit here, but I mean, a lot of what other people have said is it matches with our experience. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of things that were frozen, a lot of information that wasn't flowing toward the beginning of all of this. It's taken a while, but it seems like a lot of the funds or, the funding streams that we've been worried about are kind of unsticking. And I think our bigger concern at this point really is what happens in the future with some of these conservation, forestry, and even agriculture programs that we, feel are very important in helping us to meet our climate goals. So that's where we are, very, very similar to everyone else. Hopeful for now, but definitely keeping our eyes on what is happening currently and what will happen in the future.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Elaine.
I wanted to report that we did receive reimbursement under the IRS Direct Pay Program for our 2023 submission. It wasn't 100% reimbursement, but it was 2/3, and we're looking into the remainder of it. So that was really good news that the Direct Pay Program seems to be, for the moment, alive and well.
Elaine, that is an excellent report. And I would just say, for those of you who don't know what a direct pay is, this is the ability for states, local governments, and nonprofits to take advantage of a variety of clean energy tax credit programs, and the state and the Lead by Example program that Elaine really helps us implement successfully. We were crossing our fingers and hoping that money would come through, and that will continue to fund good projects in Maine. So thank you, Elaine. That's excellent.
And Hannah, just a little follow-up, the language to create the Lead by Example special revenue fund is in the budget. So it will be heard whenever the budget is heard, which will allow the funds to be dispersed to state agencies for renewable energy projects. So we just received 1.1 million, and the ask was 1.4. So we're hoping to get fully funded to 1.4 million. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Ann Fuchs, do you want to mention, this has been a recent area of a lot of news stories that are slightly alarming, but Ann can give us the latest on at least what she understands of FEMA and MEMA funding.
Yeah, I certainly can. I'm really happy for all the state agencies that are reporting out that some of the chaos is, declining a little bit. I can't say emergency management is in that same boat. I think things are really tumultuous right now and intense. And yes, there's a lot of media coverage on FEMA and what could be, but there's a lot of inconsistency as well. So what I can report at this time, and I think one of my FEMA partners said it best yesterday, was you can consume the news, but don't let the news consume you. And that's kind of what all of us in the realm of emergency management are going by right now. On the federal side, things are very intense for our FEMA partners, but all that trickles down to the state. So when it comes to our funding programs, we run a lot of different grant programs, from preparedness, homeland security, disaster recovery, mitigation. All of that is really on hold right now. And so FEMA did release some guidance last week for states to follow to be able to access and appropriately request a drawdown from any given federal system tied to each of these grant programs. We're going through the motions now of, answering the questions that they're after. Per guidance from the AG's office, we have the thumbs up to move forward with this stuff. So we're seeing if this works or not. The guidance is vague, so we're looking for more information. So are our FEMA partners. We're all just trying to work through this together, but I can't say money's flowing right now. I think we're tiptoeing in the right direction and just kind of hoping that we'll see some movement here, particularly on all sides, but definitely for disaster recovery applicants. And it's a wait and see game. Everything changes every single day, but that's where we stand right now.
Thank you, Ann. I know it is a challenging time for a lot of state employees working with federal partners. So I appreciate all that you and your team are doing.
Thanks. Thank you.
Glenn reported in the chat, Glenn from the Department of Education, that also it sounds like schools are also having direct pay being honored. So that is excellent news, since really supporting schools is what Glenn is doing. And I think we're really excited as a part of the climate plan to help more students and administrators make good things happen at their schools. So that's positive news. Judy East also added that U.S. Geological Services is stalling new contracts, such as state mapping activities, which may not be authorized in time for field season. So a lot of, I would say, detailed administrative things that do make some of our work more challenging. Any other folks or sort of even questions or comments from the whole Climate Council on this topic? Kate, jump in.
All right, I'm trying to lean back, but it's hard for me some days, especially when it comes to federal funding. So in previous conversations, we've talked about implementation funding, and we just had a great update on, luckily, not as bad impact on state agencies as I was worried about. And I would suspect that any NGO or business on this call is doing a lot of scenario planning, as I know the state is. Part of that scenario planning that the Nature Conservancy is doing globally and locally is, looking at the implementation grants that we have for things like river restoration in partnership with the tribes, with municipalities, with DMR. And again, to date, no, I don't even want to say it on public, but so far so good. And again, USDA/NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, is funding a lot of stream connectivity work in the state, particularly for forest landowners, some for municipalities, some for tribal nations. And I just saw Maine Public, probably others had this too. There's a freeze on our climate smart forestry funding, which could impact forestry jobs. And so that's just one tiny very large organization, but one sector. And so I've been kind of racking my brain here about how to do this. And so it's not a request to go PIF, but it's a request to us on the council to think about this as council members. Is there a way to roll up, I guess, funds that have come into the state over the last couple of years that align with the Climate Council recommendations? Because so much of this work is we're relying on the report to make decisions about where to make investments. And what I can tell you is I know that just in some of the work that we do and some of the partners' works, it's like over $100 million over the next couple of years that's fully at risk. And how can it's an opportunity for us to lift up stories of how important this kind of funding and partnerships are to getting this work done. No one can do it in isolation. And Sarah, I don't have a brilliant idea. I was chatting with Sarah on the chat privately. My best immediate thought is like, could I deploy one of our interns on this? But I kind of wanted to get a reaction from other council members to see if this resonates, because I assume all of us in our sectors are doing it, but I haven't talked to Pat Strauch at Maine Forest. And so just wanted to throw it out and see if it could engender any good ideas.
Kate, honestly, you tee up well. Really, the kind of last thing we actually wanted to talk to council about is we are now in implementation mode, and yet we are in a more uncertain period about what that implementation looks like, since there was a lot of federal funding that was a part of our work. And so I would just say, for the last minutes we have here, whether you want to make a comment or put it in the chat, I think it would be very helpful to hear what everyone is thinking about. Maybe we put up the slide just so you can sort of project forward. So moving forward, all of our working groups, as well as our subcommittees, are required to meet twice a year, and the Climate Council is required to meet 4 times a year. and we don't want to have meetings just for the sake of our required meetings. I think we want to dig into useful topics. And I think that the uncertainty you've heard from state agencies and sort of Kate's thought about scenario planning, I mean, that is the mode in which I think folks, just the very strategic thinkers on this call, which is really all of you in your sectors and where you come from, could be very helpful, helping us and state agencies think about, as well as, you know, communities and nonprofit organizations that are helping to implement this work. So would love to hear other thoughts, or folks can put thoughts in the chat. I mean, we are in a period in which the legislature is considering a lot of policy, as well as, you know, part 2 of the state budget. That will not likely all be done by June 10th, but should be hopefully finished sometime in June. We have meetings in September and December. I think in many ways, I was thinking about this of when the dust settles on everything that's going to happen federally, and when we know what's going to happen with things like the Inflation Reduction Act law, then we can plan scenarios. I'm not sure we're going to be living in a world in which we can ever clearly understand this is how the world works. So there is going to have to be a changing nature to our implementation. But I do think thinking through with this group, especially, it could be very helpful. So Kate, I mean, I like the way you're thinking about it. That could be a topic that we start to dig into in June and continue in September. Again, for folks, December is really our meeting where we try to really take stock of all of our progress over the course of the year. But again, would love folks to weigh in the chat, or just shout out ideas or thoughts you have. I do want to just say that I did see Melissa putting in the chat just the significant cuts to food programs, which do certainly impact our plan and farmers in Maine. So yeah, that's another very challenging and disturbing one that we're reading about. Carl, you put a comment in the chat. Jesse, I don't know if any of you want to just expand at all on what you're putting in here. Carl's talking about a loop. Explain your loop, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, I think so if there is a shakeup in federal funds that it's available, I like Kate's idea of this scenario planning. So it's almost kind of like inventory what was in the queue to come, and then you always, you know, kind of want to highlight that human dimension of Maine, you know, how this positively impacts Maine people. Do your inventory, see what you got, do your prioritization, and then close the loop back to Maine people. And it's just, I think it's a way that it's a series of prioritization that would allow you to address any shortfalls from multiple angles, I guess. And that I could see, you know, that's something to bring to the congressional delegation. This is something to bring to nonprofits. This is some, you know, different angles might come in to help save those priorities or move the portfolio forward. Just thought.
Yeah, Carl, that's very helpful. Ivan. Oh, you're remuted. There you go.
Yeah, I say this without speaking on behalf of any institution, but I think it goes without saying that everyone recognizes these are not the glory days for science, and the uncertainty and the complications relative to funding, relative to researchers, particularly international researchers that are part of the world science community as well as here in Maine. It's very hard to, I think, understand what happens in the next few weeks, let alone over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's not the way science is done. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty going on that will impact how sciences continue to deliver what we all need on the council and what we need in Maine to continue to implement this work. So just felt like it needed to be said.
Thank you, Ivan. Very helpful. Jesse.
Yeah, I put in the comments, when we're also worried about what's happening right now, what plans do we have, or what projects do we have underway? Or are they not going to be able to come to pass? But yeah, at a certain point, we have to think beyond, what's happening this week or this month, because we just made this plan, right? That's supposed to be. And I remember when the plan was launched in December, and just reflecting on how great it has been. We've met these goals because we've been so aligned on the federal and state levels. And I also remember when Governor Mills was reelected, like, oh, thank goodness, this is just, we're going to be able to keep making progress, and we're going to have that support to continue as a council, and just all these certain points where it's like, oh, it's a good thing we have this alignment, but doesn't feel quite like that anymore, does it? And we'll have another gubernatorial election coming up too, right? That's already starting to launch. So yeah, we're still like probably just starting to recover from the panic mode of January, February, but we really have to think about, okay, how do we get past that?
And Jesse, you put in the chat, just sort of, we are talking about a lot of funding programs, some of which our NOAA grant, for example, is, I think, 4 to 5 years. So there is some, right. That's not forever, but, and a lot of the IRA provisions are, go through 2030. So, but you're not wrong that some of these funding programs will run out. And I will say on our infrastructure task force, with the potential FEMA threats, folks were saying we need to figure out, the long-term funding pathway immediately. And we're not going to be able to easily do that. But I do think
right.
These are going to be things that we're going to have to grapple with more as a state if the federal government becomes less engaged. And that's not an easy conversation, but it is important. So
yeah, maybe that's part of our taking stock of what's happening is, here's the expiration dates for these certain things. These things are certain, these things are questionable. We were going to plan for this, but now we're not sure. We need to kind of evaluate all of those things to be able to move ahead with our big plans.
And I will say, to Ivan's point, I do think we have scientists in Maine doing really good work, and maybe time to really make sure we're highlighting that and make sure that Maine people understand that. I know Susie Arnold is out there somewhere. I mean, I will say, we're about to make a significant number of grants to communities. We have, again, a couple hundred communities in Maine taking action, and probably many more doing things, even if they're not part of our program. And I will say the kind of hope of people still doing the hard work and holding that up may be even more important in this time period. So that is another role that the Climate Council and all of you in your work can help. Although, I don't want to sort of sugarcoat some of the challenges that we're facing. Anyone else? Judy posts about messaging. Thank you, Judy. Thanks for agreeing with me, Judy. I'm not paying her for that. The only other, I think, sort of bigger picture about funding, I will say, in our thinking about the working waterfront implementation, for example, I mean, the state does have some significant funds we're implementing. I think between DMR and the NOAA grant, we have 17 million to help with continued working waterfront projects. So we are thinking at the state level about the funds we have and how to make sure we spend them as wisely as possible in a environment that is likely more constrained. So that's just another theme to how I think our mind shift has shifted of some of these federal grants we still have available are really precious. So we want to make sure we can have the maximum impact. Any other last words? All right. We're hoping to get you done a little earlier, but we'll have at least 5 minutes early. I will say this is, I'm not going to put her on the spot. I know she had her camera off because her internet's not that great, but Molly, this is hopefully for Molly, her last meeting as she's now the fill-in Maine Climate Council coordinator while she does her other job. So I just really want to thank her, and of course, Sarah and the whole GoPIP team for all the heavy lifting, but especially Molly. So I don't know, Molly, you want to say anything? Other than you're not really going anywhere, but.
That's exactly it. I'm not going anywhere, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with you all, and looking forward to continuing to work with a lot of you in my new capacity. So only good things.
Awesome. All right. Melanie, anything else before we close out?
No, thank you all for spending the last 2 hours with us, for all the work that you've been doing to help us with implementing the plan. And also many thanks to Molly. You've been amazing. She emails us back when we have questions at 11 o'clock at night and 5 a.m. in the morning. And so I hope that you get at least a little bit of a break with your new responsibilities for Hannah, and appreciate you helping us with Lead by Example initiatives as your next career objective. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.